first day of classes. My name is Kieran Sampath and I'm a junior at Yale studying philosophy. I am also a fellow of the Critical Thinking Unit of the AHA Foundation. So a little bit about the AHA Foundation and the Critical Thinking Fellowship. The AHA Foundation was founded in 2007 and works to liberate women and girls from cultural practices that violate human rights, including child marriage, forced marriage, honor violence, and forced genital mutilation. The foundation does so through education, outreach, and legislative advocacy. Some examples of things the foundation has accomplished in the past include bipartisan effort in which the AHA was on the front line to pass the federal Stop FGM Act. In 2017, the AHA was the first to identify and alert authorities about loopholes in US immigration law, facilitating thousands of child marriages in the US, and appealing to the US government to preserve asylum protections for vulnerable women and girls. The AHA's Critical Thinking Fellowship helps student leaders host impartial debates and events designed to engage their fellows in open-minded inquiry about cultural, religious, and policy issues. So I chose to become an AHA Foundation Fellow because I feel an increasing culture of silence around human rights issues that are important to me, out of a fear of being offensive or asking the wrong questions. And I think all of that just deters substantive conversation and actionable change. So at the AHA Foundation, we believe that only through free dialogue and enlightenment values can we address many of the human rights violations that we want to domestically and globally. Which brings us to our webinar today on global women's rights, particularly in the Middle East and in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there is an escalating crisis for women and girls. Since taking control of the city of Ghazni on August 12, 2021, the Taliban have imposed rights-violating policies that have created huge barriers to women's and girls' health and education. They have curtailed freedom of movement, expression, and association. They have deprived many of their earned income. They have also banned women and girls from secondary and higher education and altered curricula to focus more on religious studies. They dictate what women must wear, how they should travel, workplace segregation by sex, and even what kind of cell phones women should use. Women interviewees cited serious mental health consequences since the Taliban takeover, including fear, anxiety, hopelessness, insomnia, and a deep sense of loss and helplessness. But this is just one example of human rights violations women are subjected to around the world, often with religious and cultural motivations, which makes it a difficult topic to address. That is why I wanted to bring our speaker, Ayaan, who is also the founder of the AHA Foundation, to speak with me and other Yale students and strategize how we can help as Americans and as college students to give a better understanding and have a better understanding of these issues. So Ayaan is the founder of the AHA Foundation, as I said, a fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. In 2005, she was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people, one of the Glamour Heroes of the Year, and Reader's Digest European of the Year. Ayaan was born in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1969. As a young girl, she was subjected to traditional Somali female genital cutting ordered by her grandmother. As a young woman, she was to be married to a distant cousin in Canada. Though en route to Canada, Ayaan fled to the Netherlands, where she applied successfully for political asylum. There, she changed her name and her birth date for protection. In the Netherlands, Ayaan quickly learned Dutch and earned her MA in political science. She worked during the 1990s as a translator in refugee centers and served as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament from 2003 to 2006, where she focused on furthering the integration of non-Western immigrants into Dutch society and on defending the rights of Muslim women. What I found really interesting was that she collaborated with Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh to produce Submission, which criticizes the mistreatment of women in the name of Islam. After the film, Van Gogh was murdered by a fanatic of the Hofstad group. He was shot with a handgun 8 times, and the fanatic left a letter pinned to Van Gogh's body with a small knife. It was primarily a death threat to Ayaan. So Ayaan has consistently put her life at risk to speak out about women's rights, especially under extremist rule. Ayaan, thank you for being here. How this is going to work is Ayaan's going to speak for 15 minutes or so on women's rights, global women's rights, and in the Middle East and in Afghanistan. And then we're going to open up to questions from our two panelists, Mira and Warisha. Thank you guys for being here as well. And then we're going to open up to questions that other people asked as well.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much for being with me. I'm going to talk to you about three things that we as girls and women enjoy here in the US and in other Western democracies, and that women in the Middle East and in other parts of the developing world lack. The first point is, I would say, childhood. Being a child and doing what children do as a girl, play with toys, imaginative play, have little, girlfriends around you, that carefree world that the child enjoys. A lot of that is missing for women in many parts of the Middle East and other developing countries. Obviously, part of that, the deprivation of childhood, comes from poverty, just a lack of material things, so that children, both girls and boys, are put to work at an age as early as 5 or 6 or 7 years old, when they can't bear the responsibility of work, but families have no choice but to put them to work. So childhood. And I think as we have the questions that come from you, I'd like us to dive deep into what it means to be a child and to grow and to develop appropriately to reach the age of adulthood and take on responsibilities and the responsibilities of an adult. I think the second element that is missing for girls and women in the Middle East, in Muslim majority countries, is the ownership of their own bodies. So even when they develop and become older and transition from being a child to being a woman, we take a lot of things for granted here in the US. As a young woman, you get just the time to enjoy that transition. And eventually, you will grow up and you will make your own choices. And here in the US, I know that this isn't true for every single girl, but for most girls, it's taken for granted that you go to school and that you finish school, that you learn a vocation to the best of your ability, that you go on to college, and that beyond college, you have the opportunity to pursue a career. That for many women, perhaps most women, in the Middle East and in other developing countries is just not there. Very often, their parents or their families, their guardians, decide for individual girls who they're going to marry and at what age they're going to marry. And that very often happens when they are minors. So I just want you to imagine being 13 or 14 or 15 years old. And in some cases, I've seen these stories in Yemen, in Somalia, in Iraq, in Syria, where girls as young as 8 have been married off. What does an 8-year-old child know about marriage and the responsibilities of marriage? But even if you're not 8 and you're 18, you still have no ownership over your own body. It is your male guardians, your family who decide who you're going to marry. And once you're married off, then your husband is your male guardian. And he decides how many times he's going to have sex with you, when he's going to do it, how many children you're going to have. You are never, ever in control of your own destiny. Just reflect on that. And then I think the third element that most women in the Middle East and in Africa that they yearn for is not only to have the freedom to be able to do to determine what their own destiny is and who they marry eventually. But when they get an opportunity to work, or when their labor is exploited, very often they don't get to keep the fruits of their labor. So you will see in the Middle East women who organize themselves and who work very hard and who raise money, but they have no control over what to do with that money, what to do with the exploits of their labor. Many of them, and Afghanistan, I think, is a fantastic example, realize as women that they need to rise above being domestic pets or people who are exploited on the domestic level. They organize for political activism. They learn as much as they can about how it works within the tribal setting, or how it works within these political settings, in a political environment, whether you are an elected official or whether you can get the consent of the population to hold office. And what we see over and over again in the Middle East and in other developing countries is that women who attempt to hold office are looked down with contempt. They're seen as dangerous. And over again, there are attempts to turn into law what custom is. And the custom is women should hold no office because God hasn't created them that way. It's against the nature of being a female to hold office, to hold those kinds of responsibilities. So very often what you see is the reaction to women in power. And that reaction is not only that the misogynistic men, not all men, but only those who really find it difficult to have women leaders, they organize and they claim that the breakdown of society and the chaos of society comes from putting women in leadership positions. So when they become leaders, they organize themselves to deprive women of these positions. You see all of this unfolding in Afghanistan. When the United States left after this dramatic withdrawal in August, what you see is that the Taliban have come into power. And what are the first things that they have done? Closed schools. Why do they close schools? They see women with an education as a threat to their society and to male society and to the ideology that the Taliban hold. They have kicked women out of office, the offices that they hold of responsibility, whether they're in parliament, whether they're in cabinet positions, whether they are mayors or in other types of local political positions. All these women have been kicked out and they have been shunned and put back at home. That is not just the case in Afghanistan. It is the case almost anywhere and almost everywhere. This back and forth where it is for so many men in these parts of the world completely alien and unacceptable to see women as leaders. They only see women as submissive, half human beasts of burden. Women are there to reproduce. They're there to have sex within the confines of marriage. And other than that, they have to put up and they have to shut up. And how this works out in society and in these societies, you see it, because I think depriving women of their rights, banishing them from the public space, banishing them from leadership positions, banishing them from schools, the outcome of that is a society that's broken. When you force women into motherhood, they don't become good mothers. They may try to, but they can't because they're forced into the situation. When you force women into becoming wives, they don't become good wives because they're forced into that situation. They're put within the confines where all they can do is present their positions. And of course, there are very many women, millions of them, who heroically rise to the occasion and try to make the best of the situation that they've been put in. But still, women deprived of education, women deprived of freedom, women deprived of the fruits of their labor leads to broken societies. And if you rank the world's nation states, you will see that the societies that deprive women of, girls and women of their rights, those are the societies that are at the very bottom in terms of income, in terms of stability, in terms of security, and in terms of life expectancy, not only for girls and women, but also for boys and men. For you students here at Yale and in the US, in the United States of America, I want you to acknowledge that as girls and women, we do have problems in America. We have lots of challenges. But what you see in the Middle East, what you see in Muslim majority countries, what you see in developing countries is incomparable. The wisest advice I can give you, the best advice I can give you, is for you to truly understand this. You need to take time, a minimum of at least 6 months, and attempt to go and live in one of these countries where you have the laws, the traditions, the customs, and the values conspire to enforce misogyny at its worst. Once you've spent time in some of these countries and societies and within these households, you'll come back to America. And then I'd love to talk to you about your experiences. I'd love you to come and tell me, what are the similarities? What are the differences? I'd also like to know from you, when you're faced with challenges in your individual lives, how would you go about that when you're in the US as opposed to when you are in Afghanistan or Iraq or different parts of North Africa, different parts of the Middle East? I think that kind of connection, where you as an American student, you take the time to actually observe from up close and try to see what it is like to live in one of those societies, and you come back, you develop connections that are unbelievable, because you carry the idea that to you is simple and straightforward, and you take it for granted. Girls and women should be just as free and just as equal as boys and men. You carry that simple idea and you seed it, you transport it into societies that would look at you and think, but that's very strange. Or they might accept a little bit of what you say. Okay, maybe girls can go to elementary school, but not beyond, horror of horrors. And I think the way forward, the way that you say, what can we do? How can we empower women and girls in developing countries, is to share with them what you have, to share with them not just material things. Our State Department sends a lot of money to developing countries, but what they don't send, what they don't transport is these values, the value that we are all created equal, boys and girls, men and women. And now I think I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, so our first question comes from Howard Schreiner, who is watching with us today. Hi, Howard. He wants to know, there seems to be a grand delusion among newer Western generations that the women most in need of help are themselves. Some suppose that American women are in as dire need of saving as women who cannot vote, cannot drive, who cannot access the most basic freedoms. Shouldn't there be a relative standard for equal rights?
I don't like relative standards, I'll be honest with you. And the reason is because I believe in universal human rights. And for universal human rights to take hold, they have to be universal, not relative. But what we do need, and I understand where the question is coming from, is a dose of reality that women and girls who are born and who grow up and who live in free societies where their rights are upheld most of the time, have to recognize that girls and women in societies where they absolutely don't have these rights, that is a huge difference. So for American women to say, and I've heard American women say that, I've heard a woman say on the Bill Maher show that Republican women in the United States are treated in the same way that women in Afghanistan are treated. When I hear statements like that, I get upset. I think a statement like that is not only false, but it's also obscene and it's ignorant because it doesn't take note. It's lazy. It doesn't bother at all to acknowledge the circumstances of women who are living in dire straits. And so I understand where the question is coming from, but I don't think that the answer lies in developing relative or specific ways and specific rules for women. Universal human rights are universal, and I think the campaign, the effort for all of us is to aspire to have those human rights be established everywhere.
Okay. And then Nina Rivera from JP Morgan. Hi, Nina. Says, so many college students hesitate to broach topics that are considered culturally sensitive, such as women's rights violations happening in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of US troops. How can we remedy the silence surrounding topics that are deemed offensive?
By doing the exact opposite. Don't be silent. Silence is an accomplice to oppression and to subjugation. The more we talk about it, the more we discuss it, the more we throw these stories out into social media, the more awareness there is, the more tips we can exchange with women and girls who are surviving in their local context. So how do we do this? For the people who have the luxury of being offended, I would say, if you don't want to help, get out of the way. But for those of us who actually care, the answer is not to be offended or to be intimidated by accusations of offense or vilifications of our culture and our personalities. It is to speak up and to speak out. You would want other women in positions of strength to speak out on your behalf, wouldn't you? Then why wouldn't you speak out on their behalf?
Yeah. I think there's a general kind of ethos around college campuses that, you know, there's like this idea of cultural relativism that we should respect the norms in other places, especially when the West is said to be partially responsible for the conditions in these other places. And I think it kind of silences people from speaking because they think, well, who am I to dictate what the standard of human rights should be or how these places can be better when we ourselves are also flawed. But I think there's a flawed logic in that line of thought.
It's flawed. It's a flawed logic. It's also lazy because it gives you permission to not hold yourself responsible. And you're not responsible. You as an individual in a good place, in a privileged position, you're not responsible for the deprivations of rights of other women. But because you're in a stronger position, you could become a part of the movement that is pushing for universal human rights. And I think for a lot of people, they're just too comfortable following their studies, doing what they need to do, and just saying, I want the world to leave me alone. I think it's understandable, but I think it is morally lazy to check out and to say, I think there was one Silicon Valley guy the other day who was in the news because he said he didn't care about the way the Chinese Communist Party was treating Uyghur people. That's one position to hold. If you don't care, then you don't care. But if you actually care, and I think most people do, then you use your creativity to see, first of all, to recognize that these women are deprived of their rights, but also to use your creativity in ways that you could help. That is how all the human rights that we enjoy, they were attained by people in the past who thought that it was worth their while to fight for those rights. And we are the ones now who are enjoying those rights. So if you care, you can't be a relativist.
Right. Thank you. We're going to go to Mira, one of the panelists, to ask her questions.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us. I also definitely identify with a lot of what you've said. My family's from Pakistan and I have spent a lot of time there. One thing that I was curious about is, what do you think really is the cause of the state of women's rights in some of the societies you've identified? Is it Islam and the kind of values that that it teaches? And if so, given that it's so widespread politically and in terms of the religion that people follow all around the world, is it possible to kind of roll that back or create change on a global level?
Mira, thank you very much. Thank you for that question, and congratulations to you as a woman of Pakistani origin. And look at what you've achieved and where you are. Congratulations to you for that. Congratulations also for caring. And I'll be very honest with you. I know that it's deeply offensive to almost all Muslims when I say that the oppression of women and some very basic misogynistic rules and traditions are enshrined in Islam. I know that's deeply offensive to many Muslims, and I hate to offend, but I just can't look away from some of the rules and regulations that are enshrined in Sharia law, in Islamic law, that women have to cover themselves from head to toe, that they have to stay at home, that they have to have a male guardian, that they can't divorce. It's almost impossible to get a divorce as a female, whereas a male can say 3 times, I divorce thee, in front of 2 witnesses and he's off the hook. That a woman's testimony is worth only half of that of a man, that a sister inherits half what a brother inherits. I look at these things and I think, how can you look away from that? I think the mission then is not to be offended by these facts and to look away and stick your head in the sand, but it's to say, as Muslims, we are offended by the oppression of women. We are offended by the deprivation that these girls and women are faced with. We're then going to change the religion or change these aspects of the religion so that they're observant of human rights and that they're modernized and they're of this time. And the AHA Foundation, this foundation that I'm lucky enough to have founded, we have started now in coalition with other Muslims, what we call the Reform Mission. And these Reform Muslims are looking for ways of continuing to identify as Muslim, but highlighting some of these archaic rules and archaic norms regarding women, regarding religious minorities, regarding human relationships, and try and change those.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, just a follow-up. For example, kind of in societies, as you said, in Pakistan or Afghanistan or other places in the Middle East, it is already the case that women are often so silenced. If they come into political power, they're often assassinated or not heard. And so kind of within those communities, would you say that, does it have to come from individuals changing their perspective on Islam? Would it be foundations like yours coming in to speak to women, or how do you reach women that live in these communities?
So what I have found in the last few years is that on the local level, there are women who have organized themselves. So within Pakistan, there are women's organizations who are fighting for the exact same things that we're talking about: access to education, to have the dignity and the recognition that you own your own body and your own sexuality and your own destiny, that you get access to the labor market, and that when you work, that you keep the fruits of your labor. There are women active in the political and leadership scenes in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, even in Saudi Arabia and in Iran. These are recognized theocratic nation states that apply Sharia law, but even within those societies, there are women who are standing up, who are organizing, using means of social media, using everything that they have to try and change their societies from within. So for those of us on the outside, I think what we need to do is find these women's organizations and ally with them and help them to the best of our ability, help them in the ways that we can help them. And I think civic society, reaching out to civic society, is very often way more powerful than the government to government relationships. America is a very wealthy country. It's the richest country in the world. So when they give money to Afghan leaders, they just pocket the money. I don't know where it just disappears, doesn't it? But when you're having, if you have a students' body, students' movements here at Yale, reaching out to students in Pakistan, female students in Pakistan who are trying to improve the position of women in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, then I think that is more effective. And actually things happen on that local level.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kieran, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mira. Our next question comes from Weem, who is watching. Hello, Weem, from Sterling Heights, from Unique Voices in Films. Weem says, last year I received an email saying, I'm sorry to inform you that we've decided to cancel the pomegranate talk because of all the tension that was created in the Muslim community due to the storyline in the book about the Muslim woman wanting to remove her hijab in the book. Mm-hmm. This was the first event cancellation in the 17 years I've given talks, and this ideology is the very thing my family escaped from in Iraq. How can women of the Middle Eastern background get their authentic stories out and be heard when the Arab world silences them on one hand and the Western world continues to define them into a stereotype that fits their definition of diversity?
I think that's a very good question. And I think that when you look at the cancellation of that particular talk, the pressure was coming from Islamist groups that are here in the United States. And these Islamist groups are organized to promote and advance a Sharia-based agenda. And so for girls and women from Iraq, from Syria, from other Muslim countries, what they need to do inside the United States is to form counter organizations so that we can tell Americans in government, Americans in the media, in corporations, we don't want to be treated like that. These Islamist organizations, they don't speak for us. We have the exact same right as every boy and every male from the Middle East or any other Muslim country to establish ourselves here in the US and take advantage of all the opportunities that we have, whether they're legal opportunities or economic opportunities. But the way to defy this, I think, and to stop the stereotyping on the one hand, is to form groups like the AHA Foundation and others, to form organizations where we say these Islamists, whether they are the Muslim Brotherhood and its tentacles, or Hizb ut-Tahrir, or Jami'at al-Islamiyya, or any of the South Asian organized Islamist groups, they don't speak for us. We speak for ourselves. And I think that really is the way to push back. There is a Muslim Student Association at Yale, but is there an emancipated women's organization or students organization at Yale that says they don't speak for us? If you want to wear the headscarf, that's fine. If you want to wear the burqa in Yale, that's perfectly fine. But if you are of a Muslim background and you don't want to wear it, then they ought to respect that. And if you want to have Jewish and Christian and atheist friends, they ought to respect that. And if you are 21 years and above, and you want to drink alcohol, they ought to respect that. If you want to choose your own partner, you want to have a boyfriend, you want to wear makeup, they ought to respect that. And I think what we're missing right now is an organized women's movement from these Muslim countries who are saying, these people don't speak for us, we speak for ourselves, and we want to enjoy these freedoms that every American woman has.
Right. Do you think that there isn't that movement because it's being suppressed maybe in those places, or?
I think it is in terms of leadership. You know, if when I go around and I see who is around the table, I see members of the Council of American Islamic Relations. And I know deep down that that organization doesn't speak for every Muslim woman here in the United States. But when you go to academic settings, when you go to political settings, you have these organized Islamist groups like the Council of American Islamic Relations. I mean, the umbrella group is the Muslim Brotherhood, and then they have all of these chapters and tentacles. And they're represented in media, they're represented in universities and colleges, they're even represented in high schools, they're represented in government. They're the ones sitting there talking to the local leaders and federal leaders, and they're the ones who are saying, this is what it is to be a Muslim, and this is what Muslim women want, and this is what Muslim men want. And I know that to be false. They can't and don't possibly speak for every Muslim, every person in the United States who identifies as Muslim.
And related to that, a question from Professor Sanju Shin. Hi, Professor. She says, at the end, you seem to imply the saving way will start with women by letting them know the truth, equality of everybody. However, the cause is somewhere else. Why do you emphasize the change at the level of women? Is it because you think only with women that a change can take effect? Or like, why are the men less involved in all the changes we're talking about and addressing?
Well, men are involved. And in fact, to be honest with you, I haven't done any of the work that I do with women without the collaboration of men. So I talk to a lot of Muslim men who are emancipated, enlightened, and who are not in the least threatened by women who are free and able and educated, and they love that. So we're not doing this without men, but we do need to get to a place where girls get to finish school, go to college, have their vocations, and are free, because those emancipated women, I think the kind of change that comes out of that is the most profound. I want to go back to that statement. Every society that deprives its women of rights is at the bottom when it comes to their economies, when it comes to their security, when it comes to every single score in terms of human development. When you subjugate your girls and women, you're at the bottom of everything. So I think it's so much more beneficial for Muslim societies, for traditional societies, to abandon the demands and the dictates that women should be deprived of their rights if they want to advance. And the advancement of women benefits women, but it benefits society even more.
Yes, thank you. That's an important point. Oh, another question from Anvi from Sweden. She says, hi, Anvi. Beside the political tools, do you think, Ayaan, that economic, social, and cultural tools could be implemented as well? And should it be the same approach in local, regional, and national levels versus international levels?
The short answer is yes. And in fact, I think the bottom-up approach in many ways is way more effective than the top-down. That's the one that's demanded by government. You know, if you say we should change the laws can be changed. They're on paper. I'm looking at a country, for instance, like Saudi Arabia now, where in fact, on paper, the concept of the male guardian has been abolished. But in real life, you know, within households, it's going to take another decade or two, maybe even longer, before people actually adapt their behaviors and their norms towards the changing of the law. So I believe personally that bottom-up change is better, more effective, more lasting. Yes, economic, social, educational, and then again, the coalitions that different women's groups form. And this civil society on a horizontal level, that's going to be way more effective than the government, some politician coming out and saying, you know what, I've changed the laws. I think now there's nothing else I can do for you.
Got it. Let's go to Mira.
Hi. So I was just curious about what you think about the kind of political organization in states such as Southeast Asian states like Indonesia or Malaysia that have majority Muslim populations, but for many don't have the kind of human rights abuses that you see in some more extreme Islamist governments like Saudi Arabia or parts of Africa. So do you think that it's possible to have a Islamic state that doesn't eventually tend towards extremist views on human rights and violence, or is that a direction that it might head in any way?
So when you look at the organizations, the civil society organizations in South Asia, let's take Indonesia as a good example, because it's the largest, it's the country with the largest population of Muslims in the world. And I look at two types of civil society organizations. I look at the Islamist organizations, and they're well-resourced. They get a lot of money from the Middle East. They raise a lot of money from zakat or charity. And they're organized to try and get to establish Sharia law or Islamic law in Indonesia. That's what you and I would probably refer to as extremism. And then in opposition to that, you have various civil society organizations who are resisting that and who are saying, wait a second, religion should be a private affair, and religion should not be used as a tool to deprive citizens of their rights, and especially women of their rights, to marginalize gay people, etc. When I look at that, I see the local human rights organizations in Indonesia, in Pakistan, all over South Asia, but they don't have the same amount of resources. And so if we go back to that question of relativism, I think that if the United States and its government is really serious about human rights, then they should be funding and resourcing and empowering these bottom-up local organizations that are fighting for human rights as we understand them here in the US as a universal concept: freedom, equality, and so on. And also to address the issue of foreign money coming in from countries like Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, and being spent on Indonesian soil to actually undermine Indonesian society and turn them towards extremism. But these forces are right now in conflict with one another. And I really would like to point out that the organizations that believe in universal human rights are under-resourced.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
And then another question from Professor Sanjushin. Why do you think we have such resistance from Western liberal men, meaning much less help than we expected?
Well, I know of a lot of Western liberal men who are actually very helpful and who write very big philanthropic checks. As you know, again, part of the AHA Foundation, we get a lot of money from Western liberal men. But I think there is a discomfort, a genuine discomfort among Western white heterosexual men when it comes to engaging with women's rights, especially if those rights are women in foreign countries or they're immigrant women, because we have this constant pressure on them that they are privileged, that they're in positions of power, that the whole structure of the United States is just there to empower them and deprives others of their power. So I think they're in a sort of no-win situation where if they try to advance human rights and women's rights, they are seen as imposing their morals and their traditions on others. And if they do nothing, then we accuse them of doing nothing. And so in a way, I guess it's up to us as immigrant women, as women from Muslim majority countries, born into Muslim households, to try and get them to feel less inhibited about helping and do what is morally right and resist the organizations and the movements that want us to turn this society into a tribal society based on skin color and all sorts of other divisions that the woke are trying to get us into.
Got it. So unfortunately, Warisha can't be here to say what she had to say, but she's texted me what she wanted to say. So this is Warisha. As someone who grew up in Pakistan, I never felt like my culture and especially my religion ever prevented me from succeeding or being who I want to be. When I came to parents, both of them are devout Muslims who respect everyone, whether they are Muslim or not. That being said, don't you think it's unfair to only focus on negative examples and make them the main focus and make Middle Eastern culture and Islam look bad? There are many positives. You mentioned how Islam makes you cover up and it is hard to get a divorce, but I don't think that's true. You have the right to not wear a hijab and to get a divorce. We are not an extremist religion like we are made out to be. Why do so many Muslims not stand with you? Can you explain where the disconnect is between your message and them?
So again, I think when you say focus on negative aspects, I would say if there are women whose rights are taken away, I mean, as you can see it unfolding before your very eyes, the situation in Afghanistan, where right now women leaders have been kidnapped. And I talk to a lot of women from Pakistan. I talk to a lot of men from Pakistan who are devout Muslims. There is, yes, a small minority of Pakistani women in Pakistan who enjoy the same rights as what you just described, whose parents allow them to go to school, who thrive, and who are devoutly Muslim. But that doesn't apply to the overwhelming majority of Pakistani women. They are subjected to many aspects, if not all aspects of Sharia law. And I think that's not so much focusing on negative aspects. It is trying from a point of empathy and compassion and relating to women, because I was deprived of my rights. And the arguments for depriving me of my rights were made along the lines of Sharia law. And so from that place of empathy and compassion, and from that relationship, I think it's time to focus on the women who are suffering, expose the sources of their suffering, and try to eliminate that. And in doing so, if other people take offense, then I would say my intention is not to offend, my intention is not to vilify. But in terms of priority and a hierarchy of priorities, I think that our job is to try and fight for the universal human rights of women rather than protect you from being offended.
Thank you for answering that. That's a challenging question. And so I do appreciate you addressing both sides of the issue. I also wanted to note how I think it's interesting that the assumption when you bring up a negative example is that you are painting this kind of negative image of a region is taken when talking about, these other countries, but the opposite approach is prevalent when we talk about examples in the US, that like a few violations are like much bigger than everything else. I feel like it's interesting.
It is interesting. And I think talking about issues, bringing things into the light actually does lead to change, if I may say so. I think that 20 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, talking about the plight of Saudi women was a no-go area. You would have, ambassadors and diplomats coming and saying, no, you're offending this, that, and the other. And right now, what you see going on in Saudi Arabia is a real serious attempt at trying to bring about change. And I think that's coming only because of those conversations, the persistent conversations, the local women who say they want to have their rights improved. The girls who've just been so fortunate enough as to have been sent to school and who have seen parts of the world and who go online and who say, I want what other women want. We want what free women want. And it's without offending anyone, without trying to throw away the religion, to say this is who we are and we have a right to this. And I think conversations, publications, freedom of speech, I think ultimately that's what gets real change to come about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ayaan, for answering all those questions and being here with us. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions today, but thank you all for coming and watching. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you leave with more questions and continue to have these conversations in public and in private. And yes, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kiran, and thank you, Mira and Marisha and Kara. Thank you, George, Alex. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the students who joined.